You already know the picture. The pink Cadillac, the jumpsuit, the king of rock and roll, smiling down from 1,000 Graceland postcards, and the little golden-haired girl on his lap who inherited all of it. Lisa Marie Presley, America's most famous only child, raised inside a Memphis mansion that looked like a fairy tale, with the gates locked from the inside. But what if the person who knew Elvis Presley better than anyone left behind a recording that quietly took the fairy tale apart? Before she died in January 2023, Lisa Marie sat alone with a microphone and said things about her father, about Graceland, and about the day he died that fans spent almost 50 years never hearing. And once her daughter finished the job, there was no putting it back. So let's talk about the tapes, the truth on them, and why what Lisa Marie Presley finally admitted about Elvis is so much heavier than the legend ever let on. To understand why those recordings hit so hard, you have to start with the woman holding the microphone. In 2022, Lisa Marie Presley asked her daughter, the actress Riley Keough, to help her finish a memoir she'd been circling for years. She'd already recorded countless hours of audio tape, just her voice in a room, telling the stories nobody else on earth could tell. A month after that conversation, Lisa Marie was dead at 54. And the world almost never heard a word of it. But the tape survived. Riley Keough took the recordings, lay down on her bed inside her own home, and listened to her mother's voice describe a childhood no other person has ever lived. Smashing golf carts across the lawns of Graceland at midnight, the unconditional love of a father who adored her, the two of them, upstairs in the Memphis mansion, just Elvis and his daughter, in a world sealed off from everyone else. That's the version everyone wanted. Warm, golden, safe. One of the tenderest memories she left behind is almost unbearable once you know what came next. Just about a week before Elvis Presley died, he took Lisa Marie out to an amusement park, the two of them riding the rides together like any other father and daughter in America. A normal, happy afternoon. Except it was one of the last afternoons they'd ever have, and the little girl on those rides had no idea the clock was almost out. Therefore, the shock isn't that the tapes exist. The shock is what sits underneath that warmth once Lisa Marie starts telling the whole story instead of the postcard version. Because every golden memory in this book comes with a shadow standing right behind it. Because Graceland was never just an amusement park with a famous dad. Lisa Marie describes a house where the joy and the fear lived in the same rooms at the same time. She loved being there more than anywhere on earth, and she dreaded the moments she was pulled away from it. Her father showed her a kind of love most kids only dream about, but that same little girl was already carrying a weight no child should have to carry, and she was carrying it years before anyone thought Elvis was in danger. That weight had a source. And this is where the fairy tale starts, cracking down the middle. Long before Elvis Presley died, his daughter was watching him disappear in slow motion. Inside Graceland, Lisa Marie saw the effects of her father's prescription drug use up close as a child, while the rest of the world still saw a superstar in a rhinestone jumpsuit selling out arenas. To the public, this was the king at the peak of his fame. To the little girl living down the hall, it was something far more frightening. She was so frightened, in fact, that she wrote a poem. And one line from that poem tells you everything about what it was like to grow up as Elvis Presley's daughter. She wrote, in her own child's handwriting, that she hoped her daddy wouldn't die. Sit with that for a second. This isn't a grieving adult looking back with hindsight. This is a little girl inside the most famous house in America, already rehearsing the loss of her father while he was still alive, still performing, still Elvis, the most beloved entertainer on the planet, and his own daughter was quietly writing down her fear that he wasn't going to make it. But a poem is a feeling. What Lisa Marie describes next is a memory, and it's the kind of memory that never lets a person go. Because she didn't just sense her father's decline from a distance, she walked straight into it. In the memoir, Lisa Marie recalls finding Elvis Presley face down on the floor of his bathroom at Graceland. Not a stranger story, not a headline she read years later. Her own eyes, her own father, collapsed on the tile of the house she loved most in the world. Think about what that does to a child. The bathroom at Graceland, a place that should be nothing, becomes the exact spot where a little girl learns that the strongest, most magical person in her life is fragile, that he can fall, that the fairy tale has a floor, and her father is lying on it. She was a kid. She should have been worrying about cartoons and Christmas. Instead, she was learning what her father looked like when he wasn't okay. And here's the part that reframes the entire legend. The world remembers August 1977 as the day it lost Elvis. But for Lisa Marie, the losing had already been happening for years, quietly, privately, inside those walls. By the time the actual day arrived, she'd been bracing for it half her life. That actual day is where the story stops being sad and becomes something closer to devastating. When Elvis Presley died in 1977 at just 42 years old, his daughter was 9. 9 years old, inside Graceland, on the single worst day of her life. And what she describes happening in that house is the detail that turns grief into something uglier. According to Lisa Marie, as her father lay dead or dying, people around the mansion began grabbing his belongings. The King of Rock and Roll hadn't even been officially pronounced, and already the vultures were moving through Graceland, taking pieces of him. A 9-year-old girl, the most important person in that house, standing in the middle of it while adults treated her father's death as an opportunity. That's the image the postcards never showed you, not the pink Cadillac. A grieving child watching people strip her father's home before his body was cold. And Lisa Marie carried the memory of that scene for the rest of her life, because who could ever put something like that down? There was another loss folded inside that day too. Graceland was the place Lisa Marie loved most on earth, and her father was the parent she wanted to be with. His death didn't just take Elvis, it took the mansion, the world, the whole life she knew, and handed her a future in Los Angeles she never asked for. In a single August afternoon, a 9-year-old lost her dad, her home, and the only version of childhood she'd ever wanted, all at once. So she didn't put it down. She carried it, and that's the thread that connects everything that came after. Because once you understand what happened to that 9-year-old, the rest of Lisa Marie Presley's life stops looking like a series of tabloid headlines and starts looking like the long aftermath of a single wound. The high-profile marriages that made front pages, including her famous union with Michael Jackson. The struggle with addiction she wrote about with brutal honesty, describing a stretch where she was consuming as many as 80 pills a day. She was so far gone at one point that her son rented an entire tour bus to drive her cross-country to get help, because she wanted to keep using the whole way and couldn't risk an airport. This is the daughter of the King of Rock and Roll, decades after Graceland, still drowning. And the grief seemed to follow her from decade to decade, from one loss into the next, never loosening its grip. Her own daughter Riley said it plainly. The family knew that Lisa Marie was going to die of a broken heart. A broken heart that started forming in a bathroom at Graceland and cracked wide open on an August day in 1977. Lisa Marie never fully got over the loss of her father. Not in her teens, not in her marriages, not in motherhood, not ever. The man who gave her unconditional love was gone when she was 9, and some part of her stayed 9 years old, standing in that house for the rest of her life. Which raises the question that hangs over the whole memoir. If this pain lived inside her for almost 50 years, why did she wait until the very end to say it out loud? The answer is the quietest, saddest part of the entire story. Lisa Marie Presley spent her life as a guardian of the Elvis legend. She was the sole heir to Graceland, the keeper of the flame, the person expected to protect the myth of the king for the fans who loved him. Saying the hard things, the drugs, the fear, the ransacking, the collapse, meant complicating the fairy tale that millions of people needed to stay simple. So she recorded it privately instead, alone, on tape, in her own voice, on her own terms. She built a version of the truth that could wait until she was gone, when it couldn't hurt her anymore and couldn't be argued with by anyone. There's something almost unbearably lonely about that. A woman sitting by herself with a recorder, finally saying the things she couldn't say out loud for 50 years, knowing full well she'd never be around to see how the world reacted to them. Then, in 2022, she handed the weight of it to her daughter, and just a month later, she was gone at 54, leaving Riley Keough to lie in bed with her mother's voice in her ears and carry both the tapes and the grief the rest of the way into the world. And here's the final turn, the one that makes the whole thing land. The tapes were never really an attack on Elvis Presley. Read them closely, and it's the opposite. This is a daughter who loved her father so completely that she spent her entire life haunted by losing him. The darkness in her story isn't there to tear the king down. It's there because the love was that big, and the loss was that total, and a 9-year-old girl never got to grieve it properly while the whole world claimed a piece of her father as their own. If you came here expecting a scandal, a takedown, a reason to think less of Elvis, Lisa. Marie Presley didn't leave you that. She left you something harder. The truth that behind the most famous smile in American history was a real man who fell, and a real little girl who watched, and a grief so heavy it followed her for the rest of her life, and in the end, may have taken it. That's the story the postcards never told. And now, you know it. If this gave you a side of the Presley family you'd never heard before, drop a comment and let me know. And if you want more of the real stories hiding behind the legends America loves most, make sure you subscribe, because there's always more underneath than they ever put on the postcard.